Hey, DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella, window and door of Georgia. And I was telling our audience a little earlier, some good news, bad news. And the good news is feeling better enough that I'm able to be in studio here today. Thankful for those of you that sent well wishes my way. Unfortunately, though, we do wake up to some bad news here as it relates to RaRa Thomas. We'll get into some of that over the course of the show today. There's really not a ton I can say about that because I don't really necessarily understand the nature of the charges, other than by appearances they are quite serious and they will be certainly taken seriously. So we will talk about that here in a moment. We're also going to have a much more enjoyable conversation today as it relates to Sedrick Van Pran-Granger. His decision to return to Georgia has massive implications for the Bulldogs. And there's obviously a handful of these that we've kind of already touched on. We were live on video on Friday when this first came down. But there's another aspect of this that I specifically want to get into that allows Georgia to kind of, I think, hold on to something that really fueled this team this past year. So we're going to get into that here and have a good time doing it. And we're really glad to have you with us as we do. So Jon Stinchcomb stops by there as well. There's a bunch of news from outside the rest of the SEC. One of these kind of impacts a team that Georgia will play in 2023, so you're going to want to pay attention to that here too. And some just sort of general fun and revelry, including maybe a connection to a five-star recruit that you might not have known that Georgia had. So we're going to touch on all of this coming up. Glad that you are with us. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella, window and door of Georgia. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, as you might be aware, earlier this morning, there was some news that dropped as it relates to transfer wide receiver RaRa Thomas. We'll talk more about this here in a moment. There may not be much that I can say about this, but we will at least talk about that coming up in a moment. What do you say, though, before we get there, we do something a little happier, a little bit more enjoyable? And this is something we had time to digest a little bit on Friday, and I hope you saw the video where we did this. But Georgia got the news that Sedrick Van Pran-Granger, one of its most important leaders for this past season, will remain in that role here in 2023. He is coming back again to help lead this Georgia offensive line. Now, this is massive for Georgia in a number of areas. Thing number one, if SVP wasn't going to be here, then you're talking about a offensive line for Georgia next season that's got as many question marks as probably at any point in time in the Kirby Smart era, likely changing over for sure both of your offensive tackles. And Marius Mims is a guy that, certainly got starting experience for you at the end of the season, but expanded role for him, maybe even sliding over to the left side. I guess it's at least a possibility. A guy like Ernest Green, who you think is likely to be next in line to start, and you think is certainly a phenomenal prospect to be able to do that, but he's a young, inexperienced starter. To think you would have also added a brand new center with kind of a little bit of a mystery about who that might even be. The idea that you might introduce a brand new center into all of that would have just led to a lot of questioning about exactly what Georgia might have with its offensive line. And with SVP coming back, boom, that question for the most part is erased. All of a sudden, the overall situation with the offensive line just seems a lot more stable because SVP makes the decision that he makes. I think he also provides stability to the quarterback battle there as well. This is something that I had mentioned on Friday, that if you're breaking in a new quarterback, whether it be Carson Beck or maybe one of these other young guys kind of ends up winning that competition, whether it's Beck or somebody else, the role of stepping into and becoming a confident quarterback, a quarterback that's able to just sort of go out there and just sort of do the job. When you've got that reliable center in front of you, I think that makes the job of that quarterback so much sort of easier and better there as well. That SVP just really impacts Georgia in so many positive ways. Now, there's also the issue here of what Georgia's been through over the course of the last couple of weeks with obviously the horrible accident that took place a couple of weekends ago. And, we know that Georgia's going to have a lot to lead through this upcoming year because of that. And Van Pran's presence on this team to kind of do that too will also be very valuable as well. But even if you just sort of keep this to the boundary of football for a moment, there is obviously a lot that Sedrick Van Pran-Granger provides Georgia. But I want to zero in here for a moment on something else. And in a roundabout way, the SVP news kind of gives me a chance to talk about something I've wanted to talk about for quite some time anyway, which is that Van Pran coming back allows Georgia, I think, to kind of maintain a little bit of an edge that it sort of seemed to have about itself in 2022, and all of a sudden now coming back in 2023, I think it can maintain some version of this edge a little bit. And I think that Van Pran's a very interesting character on this because we know that one of the things that kind of bothered Georgia after the 2021 season is that its offensive line didn't win the Joe Moore Award. The Joe Moore Award is the award that goes out to the nation's best offensive line. Georgia was in consideration for it and ultimately was won by Michigan. And we heard that over the course of the season, or at least heading into this season, that was something that Georgia was going to use as a source of motivation. In fact, one of the guys who told us about that was Sedrick Van Pran-Granger himself. Let's go back to the spring here for a moment when Sedrick Van Pran talked about the fact that for this offensive line coming into the 2022 season, that was their mission. They wanted to prove that they were the best offensive line in the country. They wanted to kind of leave no doubt that was the case. I thought Van Pran's words back in the spring on that were pretty forceful. Let's go back in time to hear them.
I'll say this. We definitely want to honor the guys that came last year, but honestly, this is a new group, and we feel slighted because let me rephrase that, not slighted. Slighted is the right word. We just want to use it as motivation that we didn't win the Joe Moore last year, so we want to be the best group possible.
So, I mean, that was Sedrick Van Pran-Granger making it pretty clear back in the spring. They wanted to make it very clear that they wanted to be the Joe Moore Award because they wanted to obviously be the nation's best offensive line. They were bothered by the fact they didn't win that in 2021. They wanted to make that kind of their mission for 2022. That's how they wanted to be thought of, and you know how it all worked out. Georgia was a finalist for that once again, but lo and behold, the Michigan Wolverines won the Joe Moore Award again. And it's not my place to sort of denigrate Michigan or talk about what they were as an offensive line. I think the results sort of speak for themselves on that. And that was kind of the point that some of the Georgia guys sort of had at the national championship game. I thought that there's a great picture of Xavier Truss, kind of celebrating after that game. And I think ESPN kind of shared it. And let me just show you this on the screen. I think we have this to kind of show you here of the Georgia offensive lineman. Truss kind of putting it out there, retweeting basically the Joe Moore Award about 65-7, the national championship game. Then Sedrick Van Pran-Granger retweeted that. The point here is that the edge this team had about not winning the Joe Moore Award in 2021 clearly propelled them in 2022. They probably should have won it this year. They should have won it in each of the last 2 years, but they didn't. And all of a sudden, by having a guy like Van Pran-Granger who was so clear about wanting to do this and still sort of edgy about it after this season was done, when you see how dominant the offensive line was in the national championship, obviously one of the main reasons that Georgia won that game as easily as it did was because of how dominant it was in those kind of line of scrimmage situations there. When you understand all of that, I think it's kind of nice to know that now Georgia can kind of bring that edge back with it here for 2023. And that's where it kind of gets me to something I've sort of wanted to talk about for a little bit of time anyway. Because if you kind of go back to one of the discussions that's kind of existed in the aftermath of the season, there's been this little bit of debate of, well, these Georgia players say they were doubted. Kirby Smart himself has even kind of alluded to this a little bit. These Georgia players say they were doubted, but were they really? I mean, some of the stuff that we've heard has clearly been kind of laughable, right? There were some, I guess, people in some of the Georgia guys in the immediate aftermath of the win against TCU that were saying something to the effect of, people thought we were going to be 6-6 or 7-5 or something like that. Well, that's clearly not true. I don't know that anyone of any note thought that Georgia was going to be 6-6 or 7-5. So I'm not really quite so sure where that came from. But some people have stepped up to say, oh, no, it's silly to say that Georgia was doubted. Georgia was never doubted at all. And listen, I'm here to tell you something. That is completely revisionist history. The idea that Georgia could not say that it was fueled by doubt. The idea that Georgia did not have some sort of extra motivation to want to win because maybe Georgia wasn't quite always getting the pats on the back that national championship level teams are supposed to get. The idea that that wasn't out there for Georgia, I think it's completely revisionist history. And in fact, let me do this, kind of set this conversation up. Stetson Bennett himself has sort of talked about this. The notion that along the way, all of a sudden now, people sort of pretend like they always knew that Georgia was going to be where it was, but maybe throughout the course of time, that wasn't necessarily always the case. Here is Stetson kind of making the point that I want to make here is that deep down, this Georgia team sort of felt like, somewhere along the way, there were some doubts to be used as fuel. This is what Stetson said about it.
This is what we set out to do this year. There's a lot of people who doubted us. A lot of people who, and I know people are gonna be like, "Well, no, we didn't." Well, yeah, you did. Maybe not doubted us as far as unranked doubted us, but there wasn't a consensus, and it seems as if people have forgotten that storyline, and forgotten what this team has done as a collective. Fought through that and heard all the doubters whenever we're talking about 15. Draft picks lost to the draft, and a lot of those guys over there on defense and even on offense heard that, and so we went to work and we took it week by week, and now we're here. So I think that's really special.
Everything that Stetson Bennett says there is 100% true, and this happens all the time in sports. Here's what we have a tendency to do. We have a tendency to sort of rewrite narratives after the fact to make everything seem more certain than it always was. This is just not only true for Georgia. This is true for a lot of things over the course of time. This is one of those things that can be true. That all of a sudden, when Georgia's in the midst of winning a national championship 65-7, the assumption is, well, of course they were always going to do that. No one ever thought it otherwise. But Stetson tells you there. Well, you remember the whole thing about 15 draft picks and Georgia would be lucky to win the SEC East because they all lost 15 draft picks? Like, that was out there at one point in time. Or the Joe Moore Awards, assuming, for 2 years in a row that a team other than Georgia has the best offensive line. I think about a guy like, Todd Monken, who's obviously, been great as Georgia's offensive coordinator, but there have been other assistant coaches who've been honored as the Broyles Award for somehow running a better offense than what Monken has run here. Or, you can go on and sort of point to specific things where, Georgia's the number one team, and Georgia's the point spread favorite. But along the way, you've had a guy like Ladd McConkey being ripped by anonymous coaches. You had Georgia, the entirety of this defense being ripped prior to the Tennessee game. Remember that? Back in November, the idea that Georgia might give up 50 points to Tennessee, and you had Chris Doering in the SEC Network prior to the season began predicting Georgia to lose Kentucky. You had Takeo Spikes before the season beginning predicting Georgia losing to South Carolina. We could go back and play all of this. What Jordan Rodgers said about Georgia having no playmakers. We could go back and add up all of the analysts over the course of the year who've said all the things about Georgia, and I think that you would be left to conclude this isn't the kind of thing you want to be hearing about the number one team in the country. This isn't the kind of thing you want to be hearing about the defending national champions. And I think to fully understand what Georgia did in 2022, I think you have to understand that part of this. This was a Georgia team this year that just played with a little bit of an edge about itself. This was a team that sort of had that little bit of extra motivation because they did feel just a little bit slighted. Now, whether this was, an actual slight or just a perceived slight, I'm not even quite really sure that actually matters. This was a team that just didn't feel like it was getting the proper amount of respect, and it went out there and didn't just earn it, it demanded the respect by how much it dominated every team that it played. And with Sedrick Van Pran-Granger coming back for 2023, I think the same edge that drove Georgia in 2022, I think it has a chance to once again drive it there as well. Van Pran, in his own words, saying we wanted to be Joe Moore Award winners. We weren't, and letting the Joe Moore Award know about it once Georgia dominated the national championship game. That level of leadership, that level of competitive fire, that's what you want in a football team. And Van Pran coming back for 2023 means Georgia has more of that for next season as well. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us live on video. We start 9:45 for our first and 15 at DawgNation.com and on the DawgNation app. We're 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, across all the video platforms. Of course, on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. I know we didn't have a radio show there on Friday, so for those of you who normally listen there via the radio, I apologize for that. We try to deliver that, every single day. We just couldn't quite do that on Friday. We didn't do a long enough show. I just wasn't feeling good enough. So we didn't have a radio show for you, but we're back to normal here today. And, of course, all across all podcast platforms as well. Apple, Spotify, everything else. Just happy to have you as a part of the program. And, man, big thanks to our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia for making all of this possible there as well. Pella, the name when it comes to energy-efficient windows and doors. And listen, such an important thing here this time of year because, like today when I'm coming in, it's pretty cold, right? And if you're at home and you're cranking up that heat to stay warm when it's so cold outside, you don't want that heat escaping through poorly fitted windows or inefficient doors. you don't want that going on. You want that energy staying right inside your house where it's supposed to be, because let's face it, those energy bills are expensive and you don't want to waste any of it. Well, properly fitted, really efficient, well maintained and crafted doors like the ones from Pella Window and Door, that's going to keep all that nice, comfortable energy inside your house where it's supposed to be, and all that cold weather stuff outside the house where you want it to stay. So homeowner survey after year in our area have really demonstrated that folks understand that Pella Window and Door of Georgia really is the market leader. They really are viewed to be the best, as they say, and they've got great savings for you right now there as well, because between now and February 25th, you can get 10% off your entire project, or no payments, no interest for 12 months, plus an extra year, or I should say an extra $500 off your project. So it's a great way to save on a product that you're going to love. In fact, if you want to learn more about it and really understand more about why the Pella windows, the Pella doors are so well respected and so beloved, stop by and see them in their Experience Center in Duluth. Put your hands on the product, feel it. Talk to one of those Pella experts. It's a no pressure, conversation. They're not going to push you towards something. They just want to explain to you what the product line is. They want to explain to you what your installation options might be, your financing options, all of those things, the special savings that I just told you about. They want to talk to you about that. Or if you can't be in Duluth to see them in person, you can also reach out online here, PellaofGA.com/DawgNation. That's PellaofGA.com/DawgNation. Also give them a call, 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. All right, we're going to get Jon Stinchcomb here coming up in a moment. I also want to go around the DawgHouse, assisted today by our friends at AAA. And as I told you earlier, this is not good news, but it's a big enough story that you feel like you got to talk about it here for a moment. It's obviously going to have some sort of ramifications here for Georgia, although at this point in time, this is still just sort of early days and sort of figuring this out. So RaRa Thomas, a transfer wide receiver, this was Mississippi State's leading receiver from a year ago, who had announced his transfer to Georgia not too long ago. He has been arrested. I found this out early this morning. I guess this happened at 4:04 a.m. this morning. So let me just read here the story from Connor Riley here for a moment. So it's two charges facing Thomas here. It's a felony false imprisonment and a misdemeanor battery family violence charge. So certainly those are very serious sounding charges here. So it sounds like Thomas is in quite a serious situation here. Booked at 4:04 a.m. this morning. And so obviously this is one of three transfers that Georgia has brought in. And Thomas really just kind of sort of getting his time in Athens started, and obviously finding himself in a very serious situation. Obviously this becomes a challenging situation for Georgia to deal with. And beyond that, I don't really know much else to say here on this, other than this is not what you want to wake up to. This is not what you want to be dealing with. Certainly for Thomas, for Georgia itself. So by appearances here, a very serious situation. We'll let the legal process play out on this. We'll wait for more information to come out before we have more to say about it. But obviously, this is going to be a very, very serious situation that's going to be forced to monitor here, and we'll keep our eye on it. But obviously, bad news for Georgia for a transfer player coming in here. A couple of criminal charges facing him right now, and we'll be left to kind of figure out where it all goes from there on that. So RaRa Thomas arrested, transfer, wide receiver coming over from Mississippi State, facing a misdemeanor charge and a felony charge. And, more details, I guess, are going to come on that in the time to come. So that's the story on that. Before we're done today, do want to give some more good news, too. I'll tell you more about that here coming up. But let me, first of all, remind you that was around the DawgHouse. This is today by our friends at AAA. And obviously, AAA, a great name to know when you're out traveling around and doing things like that. I always love to keep that AAA membership card right in my pocket. It has certainly saved me plenty of money when it comes to hotel rooms over the years, but it's also kind of gotten me out of a little bit of a bind when I've maybe been traveling and a little bit of a flat tire or something like that. But it's also a great resource for you when it comes to your insurance there as well. Because when it comes to AAA and auto insurance, they've been doing auto insurance for more than 100 years, and over the course of that time, they have a 93% satisfaction rate. Now, if they're taking care of that many customers and leaving folks that satisfied, I think there's a really good chance they can do some great stuff for you there as well. So if you've known AAA as a great resource for roadside assistance and things like that over the years, you, I think, want to maybe do it yourself a service and learn more about what they can do for you from an auto insurance standpoint there as well. So give them a call, 833-718-2075. That's 833-718-2075 to find a branch near you and find out all the ways the AAA can help you out when it comes to your auto insurance. So as I told you before, we're going to have some good news for you before we are done the show today. Obviously, I think the expectation on the internet is the in-home visit for Georgia and five-star tight end Deuce Robinson going to take place here today, obviously heading towards that big decision to kick off the month of February and really bring the 2023 recruiting cycle to a close. Maybe an interesting connection that Georgia has with Robinson that might help explain why it seems like heading down the stretch here, Georgia is in such a good position, at least by appearances with Robinson, as Jeff Sentell and I have talked about in this space in the past, and Jeff's been writing about there at DawgNation.com. We'll cover that for you. There's also some very interesting news out there as it relates to one of Georgia's opponents for 2023. I want to make sure you're aware of that here, too, before we are all said and done. So we got plenty to talk about before the show is done. And, of course, on a Monday, always happy to have him there as well. It is Jon Stinchcomb, the great former Georgia All-American. He's our DawgNation insider, and this is a Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll bring on Jon Stinchcomb here, Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. Always glad to have Jon on the show, even when maybe the news not all positive for Georgia here right now. Jon, there is obviously some good news. We'll get to that here in a moment. But prior to that, reports out there this morning, including from our own Connor Raleigh at DawgNation.com. RaRa Thomas arrested early this morning. A couple of charges facing him. They sound serious. I don't know much more about that than that. I certainly know that you're not in a position to talk much more about it either, other than for us, I guess, both to acknowledge here that this is not, as a Georgia fan, what you want to wake up to on a morning like this, is it?
No, and it's unfortunate because, you know, you're always excited about adding to the fold and the fabric, and he's been an incredible football player, and you're excited about the proposition of what he brings to the team. But not knowing the details and hearing the full story at this point, I think it would be not wise to speak on it. But so I'll reserve the right to comment more once we get more information about it. It is unfortunate, though, and yeah, you look at folks at this age of life, and it's not uncommon that you have missteps, and some are worse than others.
Yeah, Jon, I think that's all really well said. I think that's kind of a good place to leave it. So let's move on to something that's a little bit happier here for right now. My gosh, Sedrick Van Pran-Granger coming back to this team for 2023. Jon, I don't know that you could have written a prescription for more of what Georgia needs than something like this. His leadership is invaluable. His contribution to the field is as good as really, I think, anybody who's, kind of playing for these back-to-back national champions here. This is just a seismic decision, and obviously I know in the case of Van Pran-Granger, you got to go into a lot of deliberation about, truly what's best for you. I mean, selfishly, I think a lot of us were just sort of happy to hear it, but for him, he obviously had to think about his own concerns here. What was your reaction to a guy like this just deciding to come back to Georgia?
Well, it's excitement for the program, excitement for him. I haven't watched him play this year. Good player. But there's opportunities for him to get even better, which I think is probably why he's coming back for twofold. You've seen guys in the past that have committed to the team and recognize there's a unique opportunity. They want to be a part of it and build something special, even though their talent level could take them to the NFL at an earlier time. And they come back, and it pays off for both. You'd be hard-pressed to find a scenario where a guy with the talent level that Van Pran-Granger has, where they come back and it doesn't pay off. I think he was looking at his draft status and saying, man, it's a good opportunity to leave, but it's probably a better opportunity to leave your mark, build something special here at the University of Georgia, and have more opportunity and be better prepared when he finally does get to that NFL camp. And you think back to the Lorenzo Carter, Davin Bellamy, Nick Chubb, Sony Michel era, that when they came back, and you think of Roquan and guys that committed to come back and the difference that they made. And I think that bar has been set, and the expectation for Dogs and the reality of what that means for the program is really, really positive. And I'm excited for him. I'm excited for the team because, man, without him and recognizing the other losses that you've incurred across the front, it was going to be a pretty daunting task to try to replace that many key contributors across the front. And with him returning, it's a huge anchor point that certainly keeps that offensive line from being the biggest question mark heading into this 23 season.
Well, that's one of the things that I said is, I mean, part of this is what the negative would be if it weren't the case, right? I mean, and listen, he had every right to go to the NFL, and I'm certainly sure that he strongly considered that as an option. But if he did make that decision, if he did go to the NFL, then, John, you've probably got as many unanswered questions about an offensive line as Georgia has had at any point in time under Kirby Smart here. You just sort of probably have that. And his decision to come back all of a sudden brings a level of stability that this offensive line otherwise wouldn't have. I mean, listen, I think Amarius Mims, whether you start him at right tackle or you start him at left tackle, I think he sets up to be one of the best players in the SEC next year. That's a very valuable commodity. You're very happy to have him. If Ernest Green kind of slides in as a starter at offensive tackle the way you think he might, that's about as good as most programs could ever hope for there as well. But it's still an inexperienced starter, a guy that's played very little. You know, to be able to add the stability of, well, here's Sedrick Van Pran now moving into another year of starting after all the starting experience that he's gained here. I mean, you've just added a level of stability this offensive line wouldn't have had by a long shot if he wasn't coming back.
Yes, and let's also recognize the loss. You know, the loss of Devin Willock.
That's right.
It extends past the, what's first and foremost is the loss of a life and how devastating that is. And far down the list, but still relevant, is the impact that it has on the offensive line and the prospects of 23, because you'd feel a heck of a lot better if he were available. And obviously, you know, this pales in comparison to what's most important. And I don't want to lose sight of that.
Sure.
With that said, with him not being available, with Warren Erickson moving on, and both starting tackles declaring for the draft, that's a lot of contributors that could be a part of the equation that are not a part of the equation. And so to get Sedrick back, it's huge, and it brings a little more consistency. He knows what the standard is, along with Mims, but has experienced it much more frequently. And in the center, at that position specifically, there's a lot of communication that occurs. And when you add new players, if you have that consistent voice that you aren't training in concert with other new faces, I think it lends itself to more success and easier transition, and guys can rely on his experience as they learn and don't have to think quite as much. So I think it's a huge boost for that offensive front, and not only in the skill level and the personnel, but just the ability to onboard those that are going to be new to the program.
How much does this help the quarterback transition too? I mean, center is obviously a very important position for quarterback. I would imagine that kind of quarterback-center relationship is just so vital. How much does this make, whether it be Carson Beck, one of the other guys, how much does it make their transition to a starting role easier knowing that you've got that stability up front in front of you as well?
I think it's huge, and I think part of it is there's so much processing that has to go on before the ball's even snapped. Identification of a defense, declaration of protections, getting everybody on the same page as to where we're going and where we're most vulnerable, whether it's pass or run. All those things usually happen in concert between the quarterback and the center. The center is usually the most vocal offensive player in making some of those decisions pre-snap. So knowing that you'll have a new quarterback who's been a part of this system, most likely at least a year, if not more, to have that voice that's been in the fire, that's been in those games, that can come up and quickly make those determinations, I think will only help, because the quarterback can then work through the litany of decisions he has to make before he even has the ball in his hands. So it's huge. I mean, if there is a player that you want returning, if you're a first-time starting quarterback across the front, it would be the center, I think, if you're looking to try to streamline the decision-making and identification of a defense and getting everybody on the same page.
On the subject of Van Pran for a minute, let me also kind of ask you this, because I've been asked this myself, and I think that your opinion on this will matter. You know, when Stacey Searels was first hired, a lot of Georgia fans had questions about the hire. I had questions about the hire. I think you and I even had, some conversation, kind of related to like, okay, what does this mean for Georgia here right now? I think it was surprising when Matt Luke stepped down. I think this Searels as the replacement was a little bit of a surprise to some people. And yet it's been brought up to me, well, now after a year on the job, don't you have to look at Searels and say, hey, it has been a success? I guess, John, I would ask you that question. How much credit do you give to Searels for what the Georgia offensive line was able to do? Clearly a dominant unit. I think most would say probably the best in the country, probably should have won the Joe Moore Award. How much reconsidering of the Searels hire needs to happen here after the year this Georgia offensive line has just had?
Sure. I think assistant coaches, positional coaches, are assessed on two levels. One is, in primary, the performance of their unit on the field, and that includes the development of players. And when you look at, Broderick Jones, Warren McClendon, you probably don't give a ton of credit to Coach Searels in their development. They were a little further along. They've had a lot of game experience, but a guy like Tate Ratledge and others, Sedrick included, we spent some time there. They got better as the season went on. They've gotten better this season. And secondly, for assistant positional coach, is their recruitment, their ability to bring in other talent. And, with looking at guys that we were able to sign in December, that hasn't fallen off either. So I think it's not a complete evaluation. You can't say whether it was a great hire or not, but all the signs are very positive to me. It's a group that performed really well. There wasn't a lot of mistakes. There wasn't a lot of mental errors where guys are roaming free and they don't understand. So the preparation was there. We see development of skills, and we're seeing addition of new talent. So all the signs, all the concerns that you'd have when replacing, Sam Pittman and Matt Luke, and you're inheriting a group that's talented, but also the bar has been set so high in comparison to other position groups and other offensive line coaching opportunities that he could have walked right into. The bar is set really high at Georgia, and I think he met, if not exceeded, in all the measurable categories up to this point.
It's our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with Jon Stinchcomb here today. And, of course, you can't be what John is, a DawgNation Insider, but you can be a Marlowe's Tavern Insider, and you get great incentives for doing that. So make sure you check out more of this when you go to marlowestavern.com. And what you're going to find out is when you join the Insiders Club, you're going to get a big incentive just for joining. You're going to get $10 off your $30 purchase there at Marlowe's Tavern just for signing up for the Marlowe's Tavern Insider Club. And after that, you go for what are called qualified visits. And when you collect these qualified visits, that means anytime you spend $15 at a Marlowe's Tavern near you, that becomes a qualified visit for you. And when you get 4 of those qualified visits, you're going to get a complimentary entree that's worth up to $20 for your next visit. It's one of the ways they want to say thank you to you for doing the things you already love doing, which is enjoying the chef-inspired food and the craft cocktails with our friends there at Marlowe's Tavern. You even get great incentives for your birthday and things like that, too. So to join the Marlowe's Tavern Insiders Club, which is, by the way, free to join the Marlowe's Tavern Insiders Club, go to marlowestavern.com for more on that. marlowestavern.com for more on that. John, let me kind of finish with this here for a moment, because we've obviously been kind of following the roster stuff here around Georgia the last couple of days, and We'll push the RaRa Thomas thing to the side for right now because we don't quite yet know how that impacts any of this. But when you think about what Georgia has added, when you think about what Georgia's kind of lost via transfer, when you think about who Georgia has seen now move on to the NFL draft, when you see the big decision for a guy like Sedrick Van Pran-Granger to stay here, how would you kind of finally assess here what looks to be the makings of what this roster is going to be for next season? I would say, even in light of like the A.D. Mitchell news, which has, obviously, provoked kind of a strong reaction among some Georgia fans, I would say overall that Georgia's kind of handled this situation about as well as the team in its position was going to be able to handle it. And obviously there's the additional issue of the terrible tragedy from last week, and it's hard to talk about regular football without thinking about that a little bit. But trying to keep this between the white lines as much as possible here for a moment, I mean, when you've got a talented roster, you're going to have guys either considering going to the NFL or considering, some lucrative offer somewhere else or something like that. To me, it seems like Georgia's handled all of this about as well as it could. Is that the sense that you also get?
Yes, and you hear Coach Smart talk about it, that wide receiver and defensive back is, especially in today's day and age of college football, those are tough to keep well stocked. And losing AD, it hurts. I mean, it's the same thing, maybe even a little more than the Jermaine Burton loss last year, and that AD has proven himself time and time again to be that big playmaker that Georgia has needed in the big games. And he's an exceptional talent, and you have to think that NIL was a major factor, and also some opportunities that are unique to him. And it would be something in days gone by where you would question that decision and go, where's your loyalty? And there's some selfish aspect to that too. It's like, man, I just want this playmaker here. And I think we're recognizing more and more, especially this time of year, how the landscape has changed, and college football is different. And there's probably hurt feelings for all those that lose players that they know are going to be impactful for them and will be wearing a competitor's jersey when fall rolls around. But I think Georgia's managed it really well. I think they probably have a good sense of who was going to leave and who was at least going to probe the transfer portal before it even opens, and then recognizing and trying to supplement in places that they need as well. So you're measuring how much loss, you're looking at opportunities to fill your roster, and you look at where Georgia stands now, which, let's be honest, will change again before we get to training camp. But you feel pretty confident that you've got a number of veterans that you can trust, guys that have been in the program that know what you're about and will retain and promote the identity that you're looking for, and have been able to add pieces, not only through the transfer portal, but more importantly, as Georgia's proven, through the recruitment of highly talented, skilled high school players that now more and more are already on campus and are starting to be ingrained into the system and belief and just overall operations of the organization. So I think they're poised really well, which is not surprising that what they've proven to do, even after last year losing 30-plus guys to the transfer portal in the NFL, that they find ways to keep the cupboards more than stocked.
Really quickly here before I let you go, if you don't mind, there's also been some debate about how Georgia fans ought to feel about Mitchell, just given the fact that, on the one hand, he's been a huge contributor to some of Georgia's biggest wins. On the other hand, he's now chosen to go play somewhere else. John, you're a major stakeholder in this program. How do you feel about A.D. Mitchell now?
Yeah, I'm grateful for what he's brought to the University of Georgia. I want to start with gratitude,
sure,
because I don't think you can take away the additions that he's made to Georgia just because of a decision he's made now. And it has changed. College football is different. The transfer portal, NIL deals, like them or not, they are here, and they provide different opportunities than what were availed to every other college athlete that came before this opportunity. And so to measure a person or a player by a standard that no longer exists, I think is unfair. And there are opportunities for student athletes to make life-altering money. And you're talking about there are players that make 7 figures and are student athletes in college. So the debate of whether they're amateurs and whether it's pay to play no longer really matters. It is what it is. And the market has said, look at a guy like Caleb Williams who goes out to USC, and it's my understanding, I don't have anything in writing, this is all hearsay, but has made north of $5 million to win a Heisman and represent USC. Well, who's to say that that was a bad decision for him? That is generational money. And for AD, there's probably opportunities that existed in Texas that may not have matriculated for him here in Athens. And I think our collectives and our supporters have done a great job of not only retention but recruitment for players. And whether or not you should phrase it that way, hey, listen, it is what it is. Sure. And the NCAA is grossly naive if they're not thinking that NIL deals are a factor when you're talking about retention and recruitment of players. And I think AD is looking at those opportunities and is very probably grateful for what Georgia has provided and sees a unique opportunity that Texas poses for him that Georgia does not. And I don't know exactly what that is. I would be negligent to say that I know the ins and outs of every reason why AD felt like that was a better decision for him. But recognizing that the landscape is different, I can certainly understand why a player who has found success in one place might see a greater opportunity in others.
John, I think that's so well said. I just really appreciate that. Always your insight, very valuable to us. Thanks for your time on the show today. We'll look forward to catching up with you again very soon as well.
Always enjoy it, BA. Go Dogs.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Good stuff there from John on a Marlowe's Tavern Insider update. We'll get ready to go cruise around the SEC. We'll also bring that music down a little bit if we don't mind. Can we bring that down? There you go. That sounds good. Thanks so much. So it's getting ready to go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Obviously excited about being on board Independence of the Seas and really understanding and recognizing here we are down to kind of our final days on that. We can bring the music back up just a little bit, but really kind of getting down to our final days here of being able to be on board and being able to be a part of this. So this is your last chance. And literally, see, y'all got me laughing again now. This is your last chance. RoyalDogs.com. That's the website, RoyalDogs.com. You can also give Jessica Slater a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Here's how it's going to go down. April 24th through the 28th from Port Canaveral, getting on board Independence of the Seas. Port Canaveral's just right down the road from Orlando. It's an easy drive from where I live here in the Atlanta area. In fact, I drive every time I take a cruise there. That's the only port I really sail out of. Drive down there, get ready to get on board, heading towards Nassau in the Bahamas, heading towards that wonderful private island, Perfect Day, Coco Cay. We've got just a tiny, tiny, small handful of rooms left here, and we are getting ready to get, basically sort of close them up and shut them down. So this is your chance to be a part of that. So give Jessica a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147, or visit RoyalDogs.com to find out more about the second ever cruise with DawgNation. One of the things that kind of gets me excited is the fact that, last year on the final night of the cruise, it was our big NFL draft party, and the same thing's going to work out this time there as well. And, last year was so perfect because as we're up there celebrating, you got 5 dogs taking the first round of the NFL draft. Well, you start looking ahead this year's first round, and you start to feel like, some of the same momentum is kind of building for Georgia, much like there was a year ago. Jalen Carter kind of getting that buzz near the top end of the draft, as just like Trayvon Walker was around this time a year ago. You start thinking about, Broderick Jones moving a lot of draft boards, and all of a sudden a conversation around Georgia players here in the first round here is almost just as much fun as it was a year ago. So that final night going to be a great time. And we just can't wait to see you on board for that. And by the way, also a great time to start thinking about some of your other Royal Caribbean Cruise vacations there as well. If you're thinking about spring break, or you're thinking about summertime, you're thinking about week-long getaways, or the 3 or 4 day variety, you got all of that here to look forward to in 2023. And Jessica Slater can help you out with all of that. So let's talk about a couple of crews around the SEC news and notes here just for a moment. We were just talking about A.D. Mitchell with Jon Stinchcomb. Mitchell made it official over the weekend, as expected, as the smart folks always like to say, that he is indeed going to Texas. Now, John also made mention a moment ago of the comparison between Mitchell and Jermaine Burton from a year ago. And I got to tell you, as I mentioned to you on the show the other day, I just feel completely different about the Mitchell situation than I did about the Burton situation a year ago. And listen, maybe both guys thought they were doing right for themselves, Mitchell this year, Burton a year ago, and maybe that's all that should matter. I'm not saying it shouldn't. I'm just saying in terms of my own personal read on the situation, when Jermaine Burton, after losing to Alabama in the national championship game, went to play for Alabama, I didn't like that. And I didn't pretend otherwise there on that, because the one thing that you knew is that Burton's decision to leave Georgia to go play for Alabama was going to be one of those kinds of things that got used against Georgia a little bit of, Georgia, you may have won the national championship. It was just a fluke, but you may have won the national championship, but you still can't cultivate wide receivers. You still can't make these guys into stars. You still can't do that. That was going to be used against Georgia. Burton essentially became a weapon, a tool to be whacked over the head of the Georgia program because of this thought that Georgia couldn't do anything with wide receivers. And so I think just the sort of competitive fire kind of burning against Burton, if you're a Georgia fan, I think that sort of made some sense. Now, hopefully nobody said anything nasty or personal or anything like that. But the idea that you're going to be happy for Jermaine Burton going and playing for Alabama, I would say most Georgia fans would say, no, I can't really do that. In the case of Mitchell going to Texas, I don't think you have to love the situation. As I said the other day, I'm not necessarily rooting for A.D. Mitchell now playing for Texas, but I feel completely different about Mitchell at Texas than I did about Burton at Alabama a year ago. And maybe it's just as simple as this, is if there was ever any kind of concern that you were, going to have the Burton situation used against you in 2021, there is no more using of the situation against Georgia now. They have now won back-to-back national championships, and the one thing that was true in 2021 that's been made obviously true now in 2022 is that the offense is just as much a part of the success story as the defense is. And throwing the football and catching the football has become a big part of what Georgia does really well, to the tune of a guy like Brock Bowers, who almost became a 1,000-yard receiver this year, a guy like Liam McConkey, who nearly matched 800 yards receiving this year. Whatever Mitchell's decision to go to Texas means for him personally, I don't think there's any evidence at all this means anything for Georgia one way or another. I really don't. I mean, I know plenty of Georgia fans who are a little bit bothered by this Mitchell situation, but I haven't heard anybody yet say that Mitchell leaving makes, Georgia's offense hamstrung for next year, that it debilitates Georgia's ability to put a strong offense on the field, because I think year after year after year of production says that Georgia has seemed to be able to figure out a way no matter what. And the absence of A.D. Mitchell, I don't think changes that, especially since Georgia played so much of this 2021 season without him anyway. So Mitchell's going to Texas. Ultimately, this creates with me some frustration about the current system, especially the idea of the tampering and things like that. But in terms of this somehow being used negatively against Georgia, the way that maybe there were some concerns the Burton thing could have been a year ago, I just don't think that's out there right now at all. Just simply because Georgia's just proven to be too good. And with Mitchell not here in 2023, I think the thought is that Georgia will still be very, very good. Let me move on to something else. And this is interesting to me because it's a team that Georgia plays in 2023, but it's also interesting to me for how it impacts a Georgia rival too. We would have talked about this on Friday had I been fully healthy. Have y'all seen what Ole Miss has done? Ole Miss has hoarded some quarterbacks. So they already had Jackson Dart. That's the guy that transferred in USC from a year ago. Then they bring in Walker Howard, the young guy from LSU. And then on top of that, Spencer Sanders, the former Oklahoma State quarterback, he's transferring in as well. And this is interesting to me for a couple of reasons. Let me start with this. First of all, Ole Miss plays Georgia this year. So when you're starting to think about, okay, well, which games for Georgia have any ability to be a challenge whatsoever? I saw where Bill Connolly the other day, the ESPN numbers guru, says that Georgia only has one game in 2023 where they have less than a 90% chance of winning. And I'm assuming that's at Tennessee. I didn't see for sure. I'm assuming that's the case. I saw where Brad Powers, who's probably the best college football gambling guy out there, I would say. He's probably pretty close to the market leader on that kind of stuff. He's got Georgia projected right now at 11.54 wins for next season. He says he's never had a projected win total higher than this. He says his average point spread for Georgia's 33 points next season, so that gives you an idea of how dominant Georgia's expected to be compared to its 2023 schedule. And so you're left to wonder which games are interesting at all. Well, I think the presence of now 3 quarterbacks on the Ole Miss roster like this make the Ole Miss game for Georgia at least slightly more interesting, and I'll tell you why. To me, this clearly speaks to Ole Miss seeking an upgrade, that while it may look like they've got 3 quarterbacks, the truth is, I don't think you bring in Howard and Sanders if you're fully happy with Dart. And if you really look at it, Jackson Dart did not have a great year for Ole Miss this past year. Ole Miss probably ran the ball more than you realize. And Dart's numbers weren't kind of amazing the way that you kind of think of a Lane Kiffin-style quarterback sort of being. So you bring in, I think, Howard and Sanders because you're looking for an upgrade over Dart. And if Lane Kiffin gets an upgraded quarterback over what he had in 2022, then maybe that makes Ole Miss a little bit more competitive in 2023. So from that standpoint, it's kind of interesting. It's not like Spencer Sanders was a world beater necessarily at Oklahoma State, but he's not an incapable quarterback. He's got some experience, and he'll be working with, a pretty sharp offensive mind in Lane Kiffin. So this could be interesting. But here's the thing about this that's really interesting to me, is that if Spencer Sanders didn't go to Ole Miss, I guess I was under the assumption he was going to Auburn. Now, maybe I'm making that up. Maybe I'm just saying that because Auburn seemingly needed a quarterback and Sanders was sort of out there, and Auburn sort of missed out on all these other guys, like Grayson McCall ended up not leaving Coastal Carolina. Devin Leary ended up going to Kentucky. That Auburn ended up just sort of swinging and missing on the other transfer quarterbacks. I guess I sort of assumed that the last guy out there was Sanders, that he might just sort of land at Auburn, but ultimately he ends up going to Ole Miss instead of going to Auburn. So not only does this give Auburn Ole Miss kind of a 3-headed monster in this quarterback competition here right now, this really leaves Auburn without that, by appearances anyway, that sort of transfer quarterback savior. Now, there is another transfer window, but it's not until May. It's post-spring practice here. So to me, this looks like a little bit of a loss for Hugh Freeze. This transfer portal window for him in his first year as Auburn coach, for a guy that has a history of kind of, making quarterbacks. Look what he did for Malik Willis, there at Liberty. Kind of looked at what he kind of did for his draft status and things like that. This opportunity here for Freeze to really land that quarterback to begin his tenure there at Auburn, he didn't get it. He kind of fails on this, and that failure was delivered to him, it would seem, at the hands of Lane Kiffin. So a little bit of interesting juice here back and forth between Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, Hugh Freeze, the former Ole Miss coach now at Auburn, as Freeze's tenure gets going there at Auburn. That's kind of an interesting story, so pay close attention to that. I'll also mention this, Kamani McLean, who you may remember, made some news there on the start of the early signing period. He has now officially landed at Colorado. So Deion Sanders gets a big win there with McLean, who at one point in time we talked about, on a number of fronts here in the SEC, Florida, whatnot, Miami. He ends up going to Colorado. So Deion Sanders gets himself kind of a big name there, and we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. All right, let's talk some UGA recruiting here just for a moment, because a lot of you may be aware that we are getting down to the end of the 2023 recruiting cycle. And there's some reporting out there on the internet that Georgia is expected to do some in-home visiting this week, maybe even as soon as today, with 5-star tight end Deuce Robinson. And one of y'all shared this with me, and I'm sorry I don't give full credit here because I don't remember who sent this to me, but I thought this was really interesting. So the other day, Kirby Smart was on the podcast that Ernie Johnson, who's obviously a big Georgia guy, and Charles Barkley, I guess they do together. And they're talking about a number of things. And Kirby actually kind of got into like the speech thing that got shared around the national championship of his fiery rant that he made it clear once and for all was not prior to the TCU game. And some folks kind of thought that was going to be interesting. But some other Georgia fans kind of pointed out here both an interesting tie that Georgia apparently has with Deuce Robinson, but also a very funny remark by Charles Barkley about the idea that Georgia's going after another elite tight end. So in light of the Deuce Robinson situation kind of being that final big name out there for Georgia in the class of 2023, I thought you might enjoy Kirby interacting with Ernie Johnson, Charles Barkley from TNT, around a number of topics, including Kirby now being old enough to sort of see some of the guys that he used to coach also now have sons who are maybe potentially players of his there as well. This is good stuff from Kirby. Take a listen to this.
But when I get those text messages from those young men that I coach, I'm starting to come across, Antonio Cromartie, who I coached at FSU, is a great corner in the NFL. His son is coming out now, and it's just Dominic Robinson, a guy that I coached at FSU. His son is one of the number one tight ends in the country and great baseball player, and we're recruiting him. When you come across these guys you coached early in your career, it's pretty cool, especially, being 40, 46, 47 years old.
Well, first of all, I don't think you need any more tight ends. I think you're good, okay? I think you're good on the tight end front.
Yeah. First of all, I think that's very funny that Charles Barkley's like, listen, I saw you on the national championship. Y'all don't need more tight ends. Brock Bowers, Darnell Washington, the idea there could be more of those big names on the way. If you're a Auburn guy like Chuck or something like that, you're probably not super happy about that. But we already know that Oscar Delp is here. He is in the fold, and he will be on the field in a much bigger way coming up very soon. And who knows, maybe Deuce Robinson there as well. I would obviously stay close to Jeff Sintel in Dog Nation in the days to come as Georgia, I guess, gets ready to do battle with, was it USC maybe still here in the mix for Robinson there a little bit. But interesting to hear from Kirby, coached his dad when he's at Florida State, that long-time connection. And all of a sudden Kirby's now been around the block enough times where some of these guys that he used to coach now have sons. He says, listen, I'm still only 46, 47 years old now. Kirby's not an old man by any account, but been around long enough to have some of that kind of come back around. So Georgia got deep ties with Deuce Robinson, and we'll see if they're able to use that to their advantage as they try to close with him ahead of the official conclusion of the 2023 recruiting cycle at the beginning of February. All right, it's good to be back with you here again today, back doing our show after a little bit of a hiatus on Friday. We had to do the show from home, which I never really like to do because it never quite goes the way it's supposed to. Also, our buddy, I'll give a golden shoe out here to Frankie Fibonacci, who shared this with us. So, first of all, very nice. He says this. He says, big concern for Dog Nation this weekend is the health of our leader, DawgNation Daily. If you caught Friday's episode, he was definitely stepping up and being a DGD. Get well, BA. First of all, I'm glad to know I crossed the DGD threshold for Frankie here. But then he shares this picture. Look at me in the center of this picture. How bad do I look right here? I mean, first of all, I don't have a great listening face anyway. We've talked about this before. My sick face may be even worse than that. I mean, some of what y'all were saying about me in the comment section this past weekend was tough. He also has the lower third there that says huge concern over BA's health. And he's got the prices right. Is that the premium crackers? And so is it the ginger ale and the crackers you eat for when you're sick and the price is right? It's what you watch when you stay home. Is that what that's about? I'm sure that's the case there. So Frankie will give you a very well-earned golden shoe for that. We'll also remind those lousy stinking Gators that Georgia's going to be back in Jacksonville coming up 278 days from right now. And that is our Gator Hater Countdown. We will see all of you tomorrow, right back here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella, Window and Door of Georgia. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They will show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price is promised, and it's great to be back doing a normal cool down with all of you. As you know, the Thomas stuff is out there. The RaRa Thomas stuff is out there. I can't really say much more about that more than what I already have. I just simply don't know what I would add to that other than doesn't sound good. But we'll obviously let the legal process play itself on that. So Frank Patterson said, the saltines, the ginger ale, and the Price is Right. It's going to fix you up. Yeah, there you go. That's good stuff. That's very clever. Very good stuff. All right, so we'll get your comments here, and we'll just kind of roll into all that. Let's see what else. Frank Patterson says it could be the AD just wanted to help the Dogs' playoff chances next year by going to Texas and help them beat the Shriners. Maybe that's the case. Maybe that's the case. Let's see what else is going on. Jonathan Aaron says, with the RaRa stuff going on, how do you think that's going to affect our wide receivers for next season? I guess it's just still too early to know. I just don't know. I wouldn't feel comfortable saying, other than I would say this is a situation very much worth watching very closely. Alco O'Neill says, do you know what kind of cigars the Dogs had on the field after they beat TCU? No, I don't, but I do like that as a tradition. And it's kind of funny. A couple of the fans actually had cigars. I'm going to say this, I'm probably getting in trouble. But a couple of the fans actually had brought cigars into the stadium for the celebration. And that was even kind of allowed a little bit, which you sort of think in 2023 you're a little bit surprised by. I kind of like that as a celebration. I just think it kind of looks like that to me is just an appropriate celebration. So I never saw like what, make and model they were, but I do kind of enjoy that. In fact, I was always a little bit jealous of like the third Saturday in October, Tennessee, Alabama. That's always been their tradition, is to smoke the cigar after the game. And I always thought that was just kind of a cool way to celebrate that rivalry. Everybody in the locker room would have the cigars in. And so I liked seeing the Georgia players with the cigars. I did enjoy that. Yeah, so for sure. Frank Batterson asking about the playoff games for next year. It is back to traditional Sugar Bowl, Rose Bowl playoff games, national championship in Houston. Spencer Clark asking about replacing Podlesny. I guess Jared Zirkle's going to get the first shot at that, I guess. Zirkle is here. He's a scholarship player. He's going to get the first shot at that. But it's going to be important. Listen, over the years, we probably haven't talked enough about Podlesny because, listen, he kicked off this year, and he's obviously been a very dependable field goal kicker. And it's one of those things where when your kicker's doing what he's supposed to do, sort of out of sight, out of mind in some ways, but much the same way it was when Georgia lost Rodrigo Blankenship a couple of years ago. All of a sudden now you're going to have to try to find somebody to sort of step into what has proven to be a very dependable foot. So we'll see how that goes. Foster Moss says, I look 100% better. I'm glad to hear that. My wife said that today, too. She said I was looking a little bit better. I appreciate that. So I really didn't do anything yesterday. I'm somewhat ashamed to say this. I don't do a ton of binge watching. I just don't lay around long enough to do that. I mean, I'm not saying I'm like the most active person in the world, but I just, I can't sit still long enough to like do a true binge watch. But I ended up binge watching yesterday. And this, have y'all seen it's like the documentary, it's a 6-part documentary. So this is some serious binge watching, about the McDonald's monopoly scam. I watched the whole thing. I was kind of curious about it because the printer where like the tickets were made is actually like an inch from where I grew up. I mean, it's like, a couple of feet from where I grew up, like right there in that sort of Oakwood area is kind of like where I'm from. And the printer, I believe, is right around there, or at least it was. It's not there anymore. And so I was like, I kind of wanted to watch this anyway, and so I ended up just watching that whole deal. So I laid around the house and did nothing yesterday as a way of trying to, kind of get sort of a little bit more energized for today. All right, let me pop over here to Facebook here for a moment, check in with those folks. We'll come back around to YouTube here in a minute. Let's see what else is going on. But yeah, I mean, I was for the most part out for the count all weekend. Right over here on Facebook. Trey Droughty on the subject of the fact there is a Kirby Drive next to the stadium in Houston. That is indeed true. That is indeed true. Kent Holcomb. Hope you're feeling well, Kent. We're glad to have you here. Hope you're feeling good. Scott Gentry, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. Joel Moody says the George and Tammy series. I saw that too. I almost wanted to watch that. I've heard good things about that. I've heard good things about that. Mark Goodman says that it looks like Deuce Robbins can play wide receiver if he needs to. I mean, I'm telling you, he's a great athlete. He really is. I mean, he just fits so much in the mold of like you said, like that super like sort of wide receiver style athlete at tight end. I think he's very impressive. And the best I can tell, it seems like Georgia's got a great relationship with him. Jennifer Stevenson Fleming on Brett Thorson's his tweet about Stetson Bennett. It's pretty funny. I think we're going to play that tomorrow. I was going to do it today. We just didn't have time to, but it's pretty funny. Sonia Prescott, I'm not going to read that, but I did sort of think that, of all the states to try to be, bring in some nicotine into. Shannon Duncan says that Stetson Bennett's won the Manning Award. So congratulations to Stetson Bennett on that indeed. Stetson Bennett bringing home the award as the nation's top quarterback. Now, there are a lot of these awards are, kind of overlapping in some respects, but one of those is the Manning Award here. Which it goes to the nation's top quarterback as judged by the Sugar Bowl and takes in bowl performance there as well. So obviously that's great news for Stetson Bennett. Good for him. That's awesome. And Shannon, thanks for sharing that too. I appreciate that. Matt Rukavina referencing the great Dean Martin in Houston song. Very good, Matt. Yeah, no doubt about that. Barry Watkins said they won't let you tailgate, but they will let you light it up. Yeah, that's kind of funny. Eric Ray says they were Cohibas. Hugh Nash, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. Appreciate that indeed. Let's go back over to DawgNation.com here for a moment. Somehow I accidentally got out of my DawgNation.com. So let me get back in here again, and we'll get some DawgNation.com comments going here. Johnny Surf Dog and Big Natty Dog talking about instability with SEC coaches. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, I mean, obviously you're looking at a guy like, say, Jimbo Fisher, who is going to have to start showing some improvement here really soon. I've told you before, I'm a big fan of Sam Pittman. I really am. But, man, Pittman has had a lot of changeover with his assistant coaches, obviously both of his coordinators here. And I think this is an important year for him coming up. I think he's made 2 pretty good hires, the best that I can tell. But, I don't know that Dan Enos is going to be well received at this point in time. But when Enos was there before, the analytics stuff, loved Enos. Loved him. So maybe he can kind of recapture some of the magic that he once had there. He and Pittman are obviously really close. So, or at least I think they are. So we'll see. But I think it's an important year for him. I think given the turmoil at Kentucky, I think the future of Mark Stoops is kind of interesting here too. I do. The Kentucky situation, we said this the other day, there's a lot going on at Kentucky here right now. I think watching Stoops maybe choosing to leave of his own volition at some point in time might be worth paying attention to there as well. Spencer asking me who I want to start at quarterback. I really don't have a preference. The only thing I want is a good competition because, like, every team is going to have a starting quarterback. But what you want is a starter that has been earned as opposed to kind of a starter by default, right? You want that starting job to feel like it was kind of wrestled away and won. And that's ultimately the only thing that I care about is that, hey, you got 3 good guys. They all have their own, talents, their own reasons to be recommended. Can they produce the kind of competition that creates a great winner? And I think they certainly have a chance to do that. Let's see what else. Oh, Lee Burkett says, in the hospital right now in Jacksonville listening to your show. It's really making my day. Well, Lee, that means the world to me. I appreciate that. We hope you feel better soon. Sorry to hear that you're in the hospital. Give us an update and keep us updated on how your health is going there, Lee. I'm sorry about that. Johnny Surf Dog says, my listening face is the easiest fix. I just simply smile while listening. Yeah, for whatever reason, I can't figure out why I don't do that already because, I'm a happy person. I mean, I feel like I'm walking around smiling for the most part. I just have a tendency to get I think I'm just sort of waiting for my turn to talk. That's probably what it actually is that when it's my turn to listen, I'm never quite as happy as when I am when I'm the one that's actually doing the talking. That may be what it comes down to. Randy Hall. Oh yeah, Randy Hall also asked about Sling Blade at Florida. Yeah, it could be A very interesting year coming up for Billy Napier because as it stands right now, they don't have a quarterback. They're not projected to have a winning record. It could get a little tricky. Excuse me. It could get a little tricky there. It could. It could indeed. Could get a little tricky. Back on YouTube here for a moment. Kenneth Holt says the idea that UGA will have a more loaded quarterback room than Bama next year is just hilarious. Well, Kenneth, I'm glad you're entertained. That's our goal around here. I'm glad you're entertained. Alan Hampton says, but the injury prognosis for Andrew Paul, I don't have too much on that, but that's one of those things that we probably won't hear much about until about March or so, I'm guessing. Early March, you hope to hear more about that? Jake Shipe says, it looks like I'm bothered by listening while watching the A&M message boards. Yeah, listen, for the people who are in here who've kind of given me grief about the A&M thing over the years, I mean, right now I'm taking a giant L on that. There's no doubt about that. Jonathan Aaron asking about Stetson Bennett in the Senior Bowl. I'm actually not 100% sure Bennett's going to the Senior Bowl. I don't know about that. I'm not sure. But I guess the basic question becomes, like, what is the draft prognosis for Bennett? Like, the one thing you hear people saying now is, well, if Brock Purdy can do what he's doing, then how come Stetson Bennett couldn't? And I guess I don't have a great answer to that. DMart42 says, what other positions can we expect to see attrition at given the number of scholarships? I would say that the simplest answer is the positions where Georgia just has the most bodies, right? You think about, like, offensive line, defensive back, things like that. To me, if I'm looking for attrition, I'm kind of always looking at those places where you just have the largest number of players. And so that's probably where I might kind of lean towards. Uncle Sam says we need depth at wide receiver to practice against the defense. He says the defense can contain what they've seen, but elite, healthy receivers have been scarce at UGA. I mean, definitely it's the one position group that sort of feels different than the others. I don't deny that. Spencer Clark asking about a Dominic Blaylock landing spot. I haven't heard anything about that. I mean, it'd be kind of nice to know that Dominic was like, listen, if he already had his home picked out, I wouldn't be mad at him either. But it's like Dominic's like the one guy that actually follows the rules. It's like everybody else is like, I'm going to the transfer portal. Now I'm going to so-and-so. Like, well, it seems like you already had that figured out. Maybe Dominic's like the one guy. It's like, okay, I've decided into the transfer portal, and now I'm actually going to follow the rules and figure out where I'm going from here. So if that's the case, then good for him. Let's see what else. Georgia Boy 1988 says, never again will I doubt Kirby Smart about the quarterback situation. And, I think that's fair. I think that, look, everybody's got opinions, right? And, your favorite team sometimes does something. You don't love it, right? That's just the nature of sports. Is sometimes it's a play call, sometimes it's a personnel decision, sometimes it's whatever else. It's like, sometimes your favorite team does something, or the coach of your favorite team does something, and you're left to say, well, I don't think that's the right decision. It's only human nature that you're going to certainly disagree from time to time with what your favorite team might do. But as the commenter says, though, when the coach makes a decision, when it works out as well as it did, well, at that point in time, then I think giving the benefit of the doubt to the next one of these situations just probably makes sense. And that seems to be what Georgia's probably doing here. Or what a lot of Georgia fans, I should say, are probably doing here. I think that's right. Paul Moon says, I'm going to be rooting for Dom no matter where he goes. Yeah, that's one of those guys I would say would be pretty easy to root for almost anywhere. John Adams already has a Houston hotel book. That's cool. Jack Marino checks in to say, new position at work is keeping me away from commenting as much. I still listen when I can. Well, listen, Jack, we're happy to have you listening. And we have, obviously only about 1% of the audience gets to actually watch live. And only about 1% of those people, actually take the time to comment. So to the lion's share of the people that will never get a chance to sort of interact with like this, whether it be Jack or somebody else, thank you so much for watching and listening every single day. And I interact with the people who kind of do take the time to comment, but if you're someone who either doesn't want to or not able to, just know I am just as appreciative for you being here a part of this show as I am for anybody else. Absolutely. Uncle Sam, thanks for the kind words. I really appreciate that. That's really nice. Thank you very much. I really do appreciate that. It means a lot to me. Let's go. Brandon says he's got Bennett walking on with the Falcons, getting buried in the depth chart, moving to the CFL, coming back to the Falcons, and winning 2 Super Bowls in a row. That'd be fun. That'd be fun. Let's see what else. Cassie Turner, thanks for the kind words. I am feeling a little bit better. I am feeling actually a lot better, so I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. All right. Few more comments, and we'll get ready to wrap it up for today. Hugh Nash says, "Can we get BA's personal assistant to run him out of halls?" Well, first of all, I've only coughed a couple times, and listen, I'm not quite so sure I wouldn't even know what to do with a personal assistant, I'm afraid. Thank you, Salisha, for the kind words. I appreciate that. Appreciate that indeed. Let's see what else is going on the Facebook side of things here. Miriam Corbin says she was raised by grandparents, and granddaddy smoked a big cigar and chewed tobacco. And she says her grandmother dipped snuff. So when I was a kid, when I was a kid, all my grandparents worked when I was first born because my grandparents were pretty young when I was born, and so they were all working still. So sometimes during the day, I'd go stay with my great-grandmother's sister. There were like 3 of them, and they all dipped snuff, like Rooster Snuff. I remember this, like this can of – it's just the nastiest thing I've ever seen. I mean, it's just so nasty. But all 3 of them dipped snuff. They did. And I never really thought about that since then, but they absolutely all did. Also, back then, everybody smoked. I mean, everybody did. It seemed like it anyway. Let's see what else. Barry Tenahan says Bama's saying how much better they're going to be than us while taking our players and coaches. Yeah, there you go. It would not be an off season. I mean, Alabama's going to become one of these teams that they love the off season, man. That's when they get excited, for sure. For sure. Micah Thackerson on the subject of Beck and Brock and Gunner going to the Manning Passing Academy like Stetson Bennett did last year. Yeah, I mean, some form or fashion, this is going to be a very important offseason for them, both in terms of their own development as players, but also kind of taking the reins of leadership with that organization, too. I mean, it's like, you got to earn trust of these coaches or really earn the trust of the players themselves. Who do the players look towards as a leader? That's a really important part of this quarterback situation. So I agree, overall that, hey, if you can go to a place like that, develop your skills, be around other good quarterbacks, obviously you want to, but it's also about how you develop your leadership with those players, the other Georgia players this time of year that's going to matter too. Barry Watkins says, my grandparents smoked all their life. Trust me, the smell in that house. Yeah, because, I mean, I kind of remember, vaguely remember, my grandfather had, a pipe. And, even my grandmother, I guess she smoked, a little bit. And, then it was also kind of makes me, they just stopped. Which is always, because by the time I got to be old enough to sort of remember, they weren't smoking anymore. And it's not they just stopped. It seems like, it's kind of obviously a very hard thing to do, and I take that very seriously. But after just sort of smoking, they just sort of didn't. It's amazing. But yeah, it was a different time for sure. Winfred Steinspring, the subject NFL. I didn't watch I watched some NFL, I watched some of every game. I guess I wasn't that into everything that was going on this weekend. I just like college football way better. I just do. I always have. I was, kind of into it, but I wasn't living and dying with the games this weekend. I was watching them, but not, I wasn't obsessively watching them, I don't guess. Cincinnati was obviously amazing. One of probably the big headlines, you go on the road, win that game at Buffalo. Philadelphia's very, very good. We talked about being happy, obviously, that a Georgia player now guaranteed to be back in the Super Bowl. That's a pretty big deal, but I just can't get into the NFL game the way that I do the college game. Now, also, if I had been feeling better, maybe I might have been more into it. Rick Joyner, is that true? I've never heard that. I'd never heard that. That's wild. I did not know that. I don't think that's what they did. Let's see what else. Memphis Dog says college football is always better, but NIL is making it worse, like the NFL. So I don't mind telling you that I've got some concerns about the future of college football based on some of the stuff that's out there right now. But I also have to acknowledge that I think for the most part, don't you think college football still felt like college football this year? And even in light of, kind of some of the weirdness of, a guy like AD, say, leaving or something like that. For the most part, isn't it still college football? And I don't say that to say that no matter what comes along, that college football is going to be fine no matter what. Because I do think that you can do too much to kind of pick at the fabric that holds something together. I do think that's real. I really do. But I am thankful to say I don't believe we've gotten there yet. I really don't. And so, there's always these, sort of peacockish, media types who always, laugh. Oh, they said that NIL is going to ruin college football. Ha, 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 ha. I think that sort of scoffing at any form of tradition is kind of nonsense, to be honest with you, because I do think that you can damage your sport by ignoring the things that makes your sport special. I do think you can. But I also think that while it's true that could happen, there's also a sense right now in which it kind of hasn't happened yet, and I am kind of grateful for that because for a while there I wasn't quite so sure. But even in light of we've had now a couple of recruiting cycles during the NIL age, it still just sort of feels the same. And I don't just say that because Georgia's been on top. The sport that away from Georgia still just sort of feels like the sport. Unfortunately, I think the biggest issue here is not how it impacts our entertainment of it. I think players are being hurt by it. I do. You're seeing a lot of guys having to go JUCO route because there's no scholarships to be had. And there's nothing wrong with junior college. I went to junior college for 2 years, so there's nothing wrong with being in a JUCO. But for a player that would be on a Division I roster, maybe years ago, having to be forced to go to that JUCO route right now just creates a level of instability in his life he otherwise wouldn't have. So I think that there are some players being hurt by a current system that's in place. But as of yet, I don't think it's been a huge impact to the fan enjoyment. I'm thankful for that. Let's see what else. Enrique Azidro says that the Kirby Drive in Houston is named after, this is interesting, one of the founders of Houston, John Kirby Allen. Thank you, Enrique. We feel like we've learned something now. That's awesome. Thank you very much. Let's see what else. Let's see what else is out there. Paul Moon, see, I went to Gainesville College too. And it was just called Gainesville Junior College when I went there, but I absolutely went there. I loved that school. I learned a lot there. See, my problem is I wasn't a very good high school student. And so it's not like I was failing class or anything. I just was just kind of whatever, just sort of, I just wasn't into it. I was just sort of slacker, I guess, or whatever, just sort of barely doing enough to get by. And so when I went to, Gainesville, I probably learned a lot of stuff in those first 2 years of college at the junior college that I probably should have learned in high school. And if I had learned all this, as like a 11th grader, 10th or 11th grader, that I was learning as like a freshman, sophomore in college, then I probably would have been in way better position to go, conquer the world or something. But I'm just sort of thankful I learned it when I did. I was a way better student in college than I was in way better student in college than I was in high school. Paul Moon says, I was also a terrible student. Now I'm getting a PhD. How about that? Wow. That's impressive. All right, let's see what else. I'm starting to fade here a little bit. Let me get a couple of more comments. Dustin Williams on the national championship merch quality. So it will get better as time passes, right? I mean, I know those Nike things they're just not good. I do realize that. But over the course of time, like some of the better apparel makers will start coming out with their stuff. In fact, I'm already starting to see some of this kind of hit the market here a little bit. So the apparel quality is going to go up over time. Winfred Steinspring says when he was a kid, everybody was smoking. He had to stick his head out the car window to get some air. That's funny. Yeah, I mean, I also remember. I don't know if this was just me or if this was everybody. I mean, when I was a kid in the 80s, I mean, I used to ride standing up in the passenger seat. Yeah, I mean, I didn't have I'm not even sure they made car seats. I mean, in fact, I told you my great grandmother used to keep us sometimes. Like her car didn't even have seat belts. Like it didn't have seat belts. This is one of those cars from like the 50s or something. They didn't have seat belts. Like they didn't come with seat belts. They didn't come from seat belts in the factory. So that's just different time. It's amazing any of us made it out alive. Barry Watkins says some of the other folks are starting to get some better stuff. Yeah, I mean, just the original T-shirt. Like I don't even know because I don't even like sometimes when I see something like that really gaudy, I'm always kind of reminded, I guess maybe young people like this stuff. But the stuff that Georgia was wearing on the field, I'm not even sure young people liked that stuff. Dustin Williams says, I was sleeping on the front dash when we went on trips. There was some of that. There really was, for sure. Yeah, Mike Brantley on the subject of RaRa Thomas. Yeah, look, that's out there. I mean, obviously, it's not, certainly sounds like a very serious situation. It's certainly worth, we're going to have to monitor this closely and see where it goes next. It's not what you wanted to hear at all today. It isn't. I think we all kind of feel the same way on that. Sounds very serious. This is potentially very, very problematic. Let the legal process kind of play out, and then we'll sort of see where this stands after, I guess, some more information is gathered here. But certainly troubling allegations. Very troubling allegations. Very troubling allegations. Let's see what else. Before we go, Soul Dog, thanks for the kind words. I really appreciate that. Red and Black Dog also mentioned. So here's a little bit of a. We all have our little, sort of weird quirks. So Red and Black, it was also critical of the idea that gold should not go with red and black. So his username is Red and Black, but he's also talking about the idea of red and black as a color scheme. Now, here is where I have to admit that I kind of find myself at odds with some Georgia fans a little bit. Because when I would wear my national championship scarf last year, still haven't got a new one, but when I would wear my national championship scarf from last year, people were always up in arms of, that's Tech colors, whatever else. So here's what I got to tell y'all. Georgia's now won back-to-back national championships. They have a very good chance of winning a third coming up here in 2023. Y'all, the trophy is gold. Y'all are going to have to get used to the idea of gold now being seen with red and black on a regular basis. I'm actually not being funny about this. I'm being serious. Is that some of y'all are going to have to just get more used to seeing your color scheme, red and black, mixed with gold a lot more frequently, the kind of shiny gold that comes on national championship trophies, because it is going to be, I believe, a much more common occurrence. And so that's just something that's just going to be out there a lot more, is the gold and the red and the black together, because that's what color the trophy is. Although Wildman Slayer says he doesn't like the gold either. All right. All right, final stuff here. We got to go. Felicia Green says, I'm looking mighty slim. That's nice to know, Felicia. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Kind of post-Christmas, early New Year. I feel like I've probably gained a little bit of weight, but I appreciate you saying that. That's really nice to hear. Thank you very much. B-Max says, I wish the championship trophy was a little bit more sophisticated. Yeah, I've never liked the playoff trophy as much as the old crystal football. That's the one that everybody really likes. So I kind of agree with you on that. And we'll leave it there for today. Hey, thanks for being here, everybody. Y'all make sure that you check out our friends at R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can check them out today on that. Also, check out ajc.com/dogsnews. If you want, I don't have the book with me right now, but if you want the great souvenirs to celebrate the championship, some of the field edition stuff, some of the book stuff, yeah, go to ajc.com/dogsnews. Now, you can get like the frame plaques and the things like that, so you can get a lot of that online there. ajc.com/dogsnews. Make sure you check all of that out. If you want some great souvenirs to celebrate that national championship, that's a great place to get some of that. Also, one more time, our friends at R.S. Andrews, rsandrews.com. Cold this morning heating system, if you're worried about it making its way through the winter that's still on its way, get it tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Find them online, rsandrews.com, for more on that. And we'll see you back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella, Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then, everybody.